As Camille held up her Supreme Court ID, the entire cabin seemed to freeze. Rachel's forced smile faded, Bryce's confident stance wavered, and Connor's gaze dropped to the floor. The passengers who had been silently observing the situation leaned in, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Camille's calm yet powerful voice broke the silence. Respect isn't just reserved for titles or emblems of authority. It's a right owed to everyone. Her words pierced the cabin, each syllable a reminder of the dignity that had been denied her. Camille remained poised, her presence a quiet but undeniable force. In that moment, the flight crew's authority crumbled, leaving them exposed under the scrutiny of not just the passengers, but the truth itself. The ripple effect was immediate. The retired judge in seat Ton A rose, offering his own ID and confirming Camille's account. Evelyn, the corporate lawyer, held up her phone, showing notes and recorded evidence. Even Thomas, the travel journalist, stepped forward, his camera still rolling. The narrative had shifted. Camille was no longer a lone voice against a wall of prejudice. She had allies, witnesses, and, most importantly, the truth on her side. The captain arrived, his demeanor professional but the gravity of the situation unmistakable. The flight attendants were quietly ushered to the back, their whispers silenced by the weight of accountability. Camille remained seated, not as a victim, but as a victor. Her calm defiance, a testament to her strength. As the plane landed, Camille's story had already taken flight. Horizon Air issued a public apology, launching an internal investigation and partnering with her to overhaul their diversity and inclusion training. Her experience became a catalyst for change, inspiring countless others to speak up when injustice crossed their path. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it, comment below, and subscribe for more stories that spotlight truth, justice, and the everyday heroes who make a difference. And if you believe that respect is a right, not a privilege, drop a 1 in the comments. Your voice matters. Let's make it heard. Camille Harper tightened the strap of her sleek black carry-on, the polished leather handle fitting snugly in her grip. She stood in the bustling terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, her eyes fixed on the departure board. A direct flight to San Francisco for a legal conference awaited her, a trip that promised inspiration, connection, and hopefully, a bit of rest. For a brief moment, the chaotic hum of travelers, the crackle of overhead announcements, and the rolling thunder of luggage wheels seemed to fade away. Camille took a breath, centering herself. At 32 years old, Camille had already achieved what many in her field only dreamed of. She was a senior legal advisor at the Supreme Court of the United States, specializing in constitutional law. From her small apartment in Newark, New Jersey, where she was raised by her single mother, to the marble halls of Washington, D.C., her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. She had often felt like an outsider looking in, but today, she felt firmly in place. Her fingers brushed the edge of her Supreme Court ID, tucked safely in the zippered pocket of her purse. The ID wasn't just a piece of laminated plastic. It was a symbol of her hard-earned status, a testament to long nights of study, countless sacrifices, and a fierce commitment to justice. She rarely pulled it out except when absolutely necessary. Camille believed that respect should be afforded to everyone, regardless of titles or accolades. Still, there was a comfort in knowing it was there, a quiet reminder of how far she had come. Camille's mind buzzed with anticipation. She wasn't just attending the conference, she was a keynote speaker. Her topic, constitutional rights and corporate accountability, was timely and relevant, and she had spent weeks perfecting her presentation. As a black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated field, Camille knew her visibility mattered. Every word she spoke on that stage would carry not only her own voice, but also the voices of countless others who rarely got the opportunity to be heard. Her phone vibrated softly in her coat pocket. A text from her mother. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Shine bright." Camille's lips curled into a gentle smile. Her mother, a retired school teacher, had always been her biggest supporter, Growing up, Camille had watched her juggle 2 jobs, working tirelessly to provide for their family. The memory of her mother grading papers late into the night, her hands ink-stained and weary, still fueled Camille's drive. Her internal monologue shifted to the weight of representation. Camille often felt a dual responsibility: to excel in her career and to prove that success and professionalism came in all shades and backgrounds. The pressure was real, but so was the pride. She was determined not only to share her expertise at the conference, but also to embody the truth that a Black woman belonged in every room where decisions were being made, whether it was a courtroom, a boardroom, or a first-class cabin. She pulled out her boarding pass, smiling at the bold print, "First Class, Seat 2A." Camille had used her hard-earned frequent flyer miles for the upgrade. She saw it as a small reward for months of intense work. She wasn't one to splurge, but this trip felt significant, almost ceremonial. She whispered to herself, "You deserve this," as if affirming her own worth. When the gate agent announced pre-boarding for first class, Camille rose and joined the short line. She moved with a quiet confidence, offering a warm smile to the attendant scanning tickets. "Have a wonderful flight, Miss Harper," he said, his tone professional but not overly warm. Camille nodded, stepping into the jet bridge. The first-class cabin greeted her with its plush leather seats and a soft ambient glow. Everything about it whispered luxury, from the subtle scent of fresh linen to the polished wood paneling on the overhead bins. Camille's smile widened. It was nice to enjoy a little bit of comfort, to sink into a wide seat and not worry about legroom. "Welcome aboard," a flight attendant said, her voice smooth but her smile thin. Camille responded with a cheerful, "Thank you," but noticed how the attendant's eyes barely met hers before flicking to the next passenger. Camille's senses pricked slightly, but she brushed it off. Maybe the attendant was just having a busy morning. She settled into seat 2A, a window seat with a perfect view of the runway. Camille stored her carry-on in the overhead bin and tucked her purse with the Supreme Court ID inside beneath the seat in front of her. She exhaled a deep breath, the kind that comes with the realization that, for the next few hours, she was untethered from obligations. No emails, no phone calls, just a chance to recharge. Other passengers trickled in. A couple in business attire murmured to each other while flipping through a travel magazine. An older gentleman, sharp in a navy blazer, settled into seat 1A. Across the aisle, a well-dressed woman in her 40s was already typing away on a laptop, fingers flying with practiced efficiency. Camille's smile returned. This was the kind of crowd she felt at ease with, professionals on the move, each with their own story. A second flight attendant passed by, her gaze landing on Camille before darting away. Camille caught a brief flash of discomfort, but the attendant quickly masked it with a rehearsed smile. "Can I get you anything to drink before takeoff?" she asked the woman across the aisle, her tone bright and pleasant. Camille waited, expecting the same offer, but the attendant moved on without a word. She frowned slightly but decided not to overthink it. The plane was boarding, and the crew probably had a lot to manage. She took out her notebook, filled with legal insights and ideas for her upcoming presentation, and began to jot down a few last-minute thoughts. But as she wrote, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whisper of voices from the galley behind her was just audible over the hum of the engines. Camille shifted in her seat, her professional instincts alert. She had spent years studying body language in courtrooms, parsing the subtle cues of bias and discomfort. She knew the signs well. She just hadn't expected to find them here, at 300 feet, among a crew trained to offer comfort and care. As the plane door closed and the flight attendants moved through their safety procedures, Camille's mind balanced on the edge of unease. She had boarded this plane looking forward to the horizon ahead, but now a cloud seemed to settle just over her seat. The story of this flight was just beginning, and Camille sensed it would not be the quiet, restful journey she had envisioned. Camille adjusted her seatbelt, settling into the plush leather seat of first class. She pulled out a notebook and pen, hoping to make a few last-minute notes for her presentation. The hum of boarding activity around her created a pleasant white noise, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax. A flight attendant approached the man in 1A, offering him a glass of sparkling water with a genuine smile. "Would you like a drink before takeoff, sir?" she asked, her voice warm and professional. Camille glanced up, expecting to be next, but the attendant moved seamlessly to the couple in 1C and 1D, presenting them with champagne. Her movements were fluid, practiced. Except when it came to Camille, the attendant's gaze skipped over her as if she were invisible. Camille bit the inside of her cheek, a small prickle of irritation simmering beneath her calm exterior. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe they were just busy. She opened her mouth to speak, but the attendant had already disappeared back into the galley. Her name tag had read Rachel Blake, and Camille couldn't help but notice the tightness in Rachel's expression when she had glanced in Camille's direction. There was something more than just professional detachment. It felt like a wall had gone up, a barrier, carefully maintained between them. Not long after, another attendant walked by, his stride brisk and his expression hard to read. He was young, perhaps late 20s, with sharp features and an air of practiced efficiency. His name tag read Connor James, and his eyes, a cool slate gray, barely acknowledged Camille's presence. When he stopped to speak with Rachel near the galley, their voices dropped to a whisper. Camille couldn't make out their words, but she didn't miss the brief glances thrown in her direction. Behind them, a third attendant hovered near the service cart, fidgeting with a stack of napkins. Sandra Mills, her tag read. Unlike Rachel and Connor, Sandra seemed uncomfortable, her movements hesitant and her eyes avoiding Camille altogether. Her unease made Camille's skin prickle. It was as if Sandra wanted to say something but was held back by an invisible force, perhaps the influence of her colleagues. The dynamic between the attendants became clearer with each passing minute. Rachel led with an ironclad authority, Connor reinforced her with arrogance, and Sandra remained the quiet follower, pulled along by the current of their behavior. Camille recognized the pattern. It was the same in any hierarchical structure, whether in a courtroom or on an airplane. Those in power set the tone, and those with less sway either conformed or risked isolation. As the final boarding announcements played, Camille sat back, a quiet resolve settling over her. She had hoped for a peaceful flight, but the subtle shifts in the air told her that peace might not be on the itinerary. She reached for her notebook again, this time not for conference notes, but to record the first signs of a story unfolding around her. As the plane taxied to the runway, Camille couldn't shake the growing sense of isolation. She watched as Rachel and Connor moved through the first-class cabin, offering personalized service to every passenger except her. The older man in 1A received a second glass of sparkling water, and the couple across the aisle had their champagne refilled, complete with a cheerful exchange about their vacation plans. Even the well-dressed woman in 2C, who barely looked up from her laptop, was served a fresh orange juice with a smile. Camille shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the armrest. It wasn't just being overlooked, it was the pointed way they skipped her row, the forced casualness of their movements when they approached her side of the cabin. Each omission felt deliberate, as if a spotlight had been cast over her presence, highlighting her as an anomaly. She was keenly aware of the contrast between the attentive service around her and the empty tray table in front of her. When Sandra Mills finally approached, her hesitation was palpable. She clutched a service tray, the glasses on it clinking softly as her hands trembled. Sandra's eyes darted to Camille's seat, then quickly away, as if making eye contact might ignite a confrontation. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her voice thin and barely audible over the hum of the engines. Camille smiled politely, trying to ease Sandra's visible discomfort. "Just water, please. Ice, if possible." Sandra nodded, but the interaction was already fraying at the edges. She retreated to the galley, and when she returned, she handed Camille a glass of water, lukewarm, with only a couple of half-melted ice cubes. Camille accepted it without comment, her gratitude masking the sting of yet another small slight. She sipped the water, its tepidness a reflection of the atmosphere around her. The other passengers were now absorbed in their own worlds, headphones on, screens glowing, completely unaware of the silent currents of discomfort swirling through the cabin. Camille's mind wrestled with itself. Part of her wanted to brush it off, to find solace in the thought that maybe she was overreacting. After all, it was just a glass of water, just a missed offer of a drink. But beneath the surface, the sharper truth pressed against her resolve. She had experienced these moments before, small, seemingly insignificant acts that, when strung together, painted a larger picture of bias. Her memory offered up flashes of past encounters, the sideways glances when she walked into high-end boutiques, the "Are you sure you're in the right place?" questions when arriving at corporate meetings, and the guarded expressions when she introduced herself as an attorney. Each instance had been a pinprick, a small wound that healed over but left a scar. Camille took a deep breath, a soft inhale that filled her lungs and steadied her nerves. She had learned through experience that not every battle needed to be fought openly. Sometimes strength lay in observation, in patience. Her notebook sat on her lap, its pages empty, waiting. She uncapped her pen, wrote the date at the top of the page, and began to jot down notes, not for her conference presentation, but to chronicle what was unfolding before her. Her instinct to document was both a habit of her profession and a defense mechanism. She knew the power of evidence, how facts could dismantle narratives and hold truth to the light. Whatever this was, oversight, bias, or something more malicious, she would be ready. The plane had settled into its cruising altitude, the hum of the engines a steady backdrop to the clink of glasses and the soft rustle of pages turning. Camille had finally found a rhythm, her pen gliding over the notebook as she outlined key points for her presentation. She had just underlined a phrase, "Equal justice under law," when a shadow loomed over her seat. "Ma'am, we need to see your ID," Rachel's voice cut through Camille's focus, sharp and devoid of the warmth she'd used with the other passengers. Connor stood just behind her, arms crossed over his chest, his expression blank but his posture defensive. Camille looked up slowly, her brow knitting in confusion. "My ID? Is there an issue with my seat assignment?" "It's just a routine check," Connor interjected, his tone clipped. "We need to verify all first-class passengers. Standard procedure." Camille held his gaze, searching for a sign of sincerity, but his expression remained closed. "I've flown first class many times and never encountered a mid-flight ID check. Can you explain why this policy is being enforced now?" Connor's lips tightened, a brief flash of annoyance breaking through his neutral mask. "Ma'am, we're just following protocols. If you don't have your ID, we might have to escalate this to the captain." Her mind sharpened, the lawyer in her stepping forward. "Escalate for what, exactly?" "I've shown my boarding pass, been seated here since before takeoff, and have not caused any disruption." "What specific policy are you referring to?" Rachel's discomfort was evident. She glanced at Connor, a flicker of uncertainty passing between them. Camille caught it, an unspoken exchange, a hesitation that told her this wasn't about a policy at all. It was about her. About the woman in seat 2A, who didn't fit their image of a first-class passenger. Connor stepped forward, his voice dropping into a rehearsed cadence. "Ma'am, if you're unable to provide identification, we may need to discuss reseating you. Perhaps there was a mix-up with the ticketing." Camille felt the weight of his words settle heavily in the space between them. A mix-up? The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. The suggestion that she, a black woman, had somehow found herself here by mistake, whether through deceit or accident, was unmistakable. She kept her expression calm, but the steady pressure of anger built beneath her skin. "I'd like to see your lead flight attendant, please," she said, her voice measured. "If you're going to question me specifically, I'd appreciate transparency. Otherwise, I'll need to document this as a discriminatory action." Her response seemed to catch them off guard. Connor's bravado wavered, his shoulders tensing. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Camille held their gaze, refusing to shrink under the scrutiny. She had spent her career defending the rights of others. She was more than capable of defending herself. After a tense beat, Rachel mumbled, "We'll be right back," and pulled Connor toward the galley. Camille watched them retreat, her pulse steady but her resolve hardening. The page of her notebook remained open, her pen resting against the words she had written earlier. She drew a line beneath them, marking this moment. It was more than an inconvenience. It was a line crossed, a test of her dignity. And Camille had no intention of failing it. Lunch service began with the quiet clatter of trays and the soft hum of flight attendants moving through the aisle. Camille watched as Rachel and Connor wheeled a cart draped with a white cloth, its surface arranged with elegant meal trays. The first-class passengers around her received beautifully plated dishes, grilled chicken with roasted vegetables, fresh fruit cups, and warm bread rolls tucked into white linen. When Rachel reached Camille's row, her demeanor shifted. The friendly, almost performative smile she wore for the others faded into something colder. She held out a small, dented cardboard box. It looked nothing like the meals served to the others. Camille accepted it, her hand steady despite the rush of heat that crept up her neck. She opened the box slowly. Inside, a pre-packaged snack of stale crackers, a tiny container of hummus, and a single packet of raisins lay haphazardly against the crumpled liner. It was the kind of snack typically handed out in economy, not in first class, where the ticket price promised a much higher standard of service. "Is there a problem?" Rachel asked, her tone more warning than concern. Camille looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "I noticed the other passengers received full meal service. Is there a reason I'm getting a snack box instead?" Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. "We have limited supplies. It's first come, first served." "Interesting," Camille said, her voice calm. "I've been here since the start of boarding. I should have been among the first served." Rachel didn't respond. Instead, she turned sharply and pushed the cart down the aisle, where Camille could hear her speaking to Connor in hushed tones. She couldn't make out every word, but certain phrases stood out. Not worth the trouble. These people. And always trying to get something for free. A cold weight settled in Camille's chest. She had spent a lifetime discerning the difference between ignorance and intention. This wasn't an oversight or a mistake. It was deliberate. She forced herself to remain still, every instinct urging her to react, to confront, to defend. But she knew from experience that her calmness would be her strongest armor. Camille glanced around, noting the passengers' lack of awareness. They were engrossed in their own worlds, oblivious to the microaggressions threading through the cabin. She scribbled a note in her notebook, documenting every detail: the snack box, the whispered conversation, the words she had caught. Evidence, if needed. She picked up the stale cracker, turning it over in her hand. It was a small thing, but it symbolized so much more. The quiet ways people were told they didn't belong. The soft-spoken rejections that cut deeper than outright slurs. She took a deliberate bite, the blandness of the cracker echoing the hollow treatment she had received. She would not let this slide. Camille knew this wasn't just about her meal, it was about the principle. About the unspoken rules that allowed prejudice to flourish under the guise of policy and procedure. Her patience had limits, and they were nearing the edge. Camille opened her phone and began typing, her thumbs moving methodically over the screen. She documented everything: the subpar snack box, the whispered comments, and the conspicuous absence of service. Her notes were clinical, each detail recorded with the precision of a legal brief. She added timestamps and even captured a discreet photo of the battered snack box beside the untouched, polished tray on the passenger's table across the aisle. Her mind worked in dual layers, one part analyzing the situation as an attorney, the other as a black woman well-versed in navigating prejudice. She knew that documentation was power. If this turned into a formal complaint or, worse, an accusation against her, she needed her own record. She had seen how stories could be twisted, narratives reshaped by those in authority. Her notes would serve as her truth, immutable and clear. She felt a shift in the air around her. When she looked up, she caught the eye of the woman seated across the aisle. The woman, dressed in a tailored blazer and with a laptop balanced on her knees, offered a small, knowing nod. Camille recognized the look. Not pity, but solidarity. A quiet acknowledgement that what was happening wasn't right. After a few moments, the woman leaned over, keeping her voice low. "I'm Evelyn Green," she said, extending a business card with her free hand. "Corporate lawyer. If you need a witness, I've been taking notes too." Camille accepted the card, her expression both grateful and guarded. "Thank you. I hope it won't come to that, but it's good to know I'm not imagining things." Evelyn's eyes softened. "You're not. I've seen it before. People think if they do it quietly, it doesn't count, but it does." She tapped her phone gently. "I've got your back." As Evelyn settled back into her seat, Camille felt a ripple of strength. It was a reminder that even in uncomfortable situations, allies could emerge. People who recognized injustice and were willing to stand up, even if only quietly. A few rows ahead, another passenger turned slightly, his phone angled just enough for Camille to see that he was recording. He had a sharp, professional look, salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who seemed like he traveled often and knew the rhythms of air travel well. When he caught Camille's gaze, he offered a discreet nod. His actions spoke volumes. He saw what was happening, and he intended to make sure there was a record of it. Camille felt a subtle shift inside her. The isolation that had settled around her like a fog began to lift. She wasn't alone. The truth wasn't just her version of events. It was being witnessed, documented by others. The power of observation, of quiet support, emboldened her. Whatever happened next, she knew she had allies, and if the flight crew continued down this path, they would soon learn that their whispers and sidelong glances had been neither as private nor as harmless as they believed. Evelyn's business card sat in Camille's palm, the raised lettering cool against her skin. It read, "Evelyn Green, Corporate Litigation Specialist," followed by a prestigious law firm's logo. Camille slipped it into her notebook, a quiet affirmation that someone else saw what was happening, that her reality was not a distorted view through the lens of paranoia. Evelyn maintained a calm composure, her attention drifting naturally back to her laptop, but her body language spoke volumes. She kept an ear tuned to the cabin, her presence a steady anchor amidst the growing tension. Camille felt an undercurrent of relief. Evelyn's support wasn't performative. She was ready to act if needed. Just ahead, Thomas Bell continued to record discreetly. His phone rested on his tray table, camera angled to capture the aisle where the flight attendants hovered. His demeanor was casual, almost uninterested, but Camille noticed how he tilted his phone slightly whenever Rachel or Connor passed by. His silent vigilance provided an additional layer of protection, a witness to the subtleties that might otherwise be dismissed. The cabin remained a bubble of strained normalcy until Camille heard it, the hushed conversation between Connor and Rachel near the galley. Their voices low, but not as quiet as they believed. She didn't need to strain to catch the words. They floated through the gap in the curtain, sharp and unguarded. "She probably just used miles," Connor muttered. "These people always find a way to cheat the system." Rachel's response was muffled, but the derision in her tone was unmistakable. "Do you think we should call the air marshal? If she keeps pushing, we could say she's being disruptive." Camille's grip on her pen tightened until her knuckles turned white. There it was, the confirmation of her suspicions. This wasn't just a passive bias. It was an active effort to undermine her, to create a situation where she could be labeled the problem. She knew the weight of those words, how easily a narrative could be spun to paint her as the aggressor. The consequences could be severe, especially in a post-9/11 world where the mere suggestion of a disruptive passenger could lead to detainment or worse. A sense of foreboding settled over her. Camille knew how dangerous a false narrative could be, how quickly an accusation could become a label. Her mind raced, balancing on a knife's edge between the need to defend herself and the need to remain calm. She had seen lives unraveled by lesser lies, but she also knew the power of truth, especially when it was recorded, documented, and witnessed. Camille glanced toward Evelyn and then at Thomas. They were still with her, their subtle nods a promise of solidarity. She was not without allies, and if the crew decided to push forward with their plan, they would soon find out that she was not a woman easily undone. Camille sensed the shift in the cabin's energy before she saw him. Bryce approached her row, his posture a mix of forced authority and barely concealed discomfort. His practiced smile didn't reach his eyes, which darted briefly to the other passengers before settling on her. It was the look of someone bracing for conflict. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and measured, "we've received concerns from the crew about your behavior. If this continues, we might need to discuss relocating you to another seat for safety reasons." Camille's pen paused over her notebook, her expression unchanging. "Relocate me? For what reason exactly?" He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through his rehearsed demeanor. "There have been reports of disruptive behavior. We need to maintain a calm and safe environment for all passengers." "Disruptive?" She repeated the word slowly as if testing its weight. "I've been sitting quietly in my seat, documenting what I'm observing. If that's considered disruptive, perhaps you should clarify what specific behavior you're referring to." Bryce's jaw tightened. "We're simply asking for cooperation." Camille held his gaze, her voice steady and unyielding. "And I'm simply asking for the same level of service and respect as every other passenger in this cabin. If you're going to ask me to move, I'd appreciate a clear explanation and a formal record of the request." Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. She could feel the attention of those nearby, the subtle shift of heads turning, the quiet rustle of curiosity. Evelyn's laptop remained open, her fingers poised over the keyboard, and Thomas's phone remained on his tray table, the camera angle unchanged. They were ready. Bryce's confidence wavered, his stance less certain. "We're just following protocol. If that's the case, I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant and, if necessary, the captain." Camille's tone was polite, but edged with steel. "And if you're concerned about safety, I'm more than willing to address this with airport security upon landing." A brief shadow of panic crossed his face. Bryce had come prepared for compliance, not confrontation. He took a small step back, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I'll be back," he muttered, and then he was gone, retreating to the safety of the galley. Camille remained motionless, her expression a mask of calm, but beneath it, she was already preparing, every nerve finely tuned. She knew the playbook, the quiet setup, the manufactured escalation, and she was ready to meet it head-on. Camille sat still, her notebook resting on her lap, the pages filled with careful notes. Her pen tapped softly against the edge of the paper, a steady rhythm in the quiet tension of the cabin. She could feel the weight of anticipation from the passengers around her, a collective inhale held just below the surface. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, every legal angle, every potential outcome. When Bryce returned, he was not alone. Rachel stood beside him, her expression tight and unreadable, while Connor lingered just behind them, his posture rigid. They formed a small wall of authority, their shadows stretching over Camille's seat. "Ma'am, we need to see your identification," Rachel announced, her voice steadier this time. She had found a script, and she was determined to stick to it. "We're conducting a verification for safety purposes." Camille looked up slowly, her calm a stark contrast to their rising discomfort. "Is everyone else being asked to provide identification mid-flight, or is this special treatment reserved just for me?" Rachel's cheeks flushed, a splotch of red against her pale skin. "We can do this the easy way, or we can involve the captain. It's your choice." Camille took a slow, deliberate breath. since you insist." She reached beneath her seat, her fingers finding the familiar shape of her purse. The cabin seemed to hold its breath as she unzipped the pocket, the quiet sound amplified in the silence. Her hand emerged holding a small black leather wallet. With a flick of her thumb, she opened it to reveal a gold-embossed badge and an ID card. The emblem of the Supreme Court of the United States shone under the soft cabin lights, unmistakable and undeniable. Her name, Camille Harper, stood in crisp, official print beside her photograph. The effect was immediate. Rachel's bravado crumbled, her expression shifting from irritation to shock. Bryce's mouth opened slightly, his words lost somewhere between thought and speech. Even Connor, who had remained at the back, took a small, instinctive step away, as if the weight of Camille's identity might physically push him back. "I am Camille Harper," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "Senior legal advisor at the Supreme Court. I have spent my career upholding the very laws you are dangerously close to violating. The treatment I have received on this flight, being singled out, subjected to baseless accusations, and threatened with removal, is not only unprofessional, but also discriminatory." Her words filled the space, every syllable sharp as glass. She did not raise her voice, but the power of it rippled through the cabin. The other passengers watched, some leaning forward, others with phones in hand, the soft glow of their screens capturing the moment. If I, as a representative of one of the highest legal institutions in this country, am being treated this way, I shudder to think how others are treated who might not have the same platform or resources to defend themselves. Camille continued, "What you have done here is not just a lapse in service. It is a display of prejudice, and I promise you, it will not go unnoticed." Rachel's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Bryce looked desperately to Connor, but there was no support forthcoming. The walls they had built with their authority had crumbled in the face of truth, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. "I suggest you consider your next steps carefully," Camille said, her voice softer but no less firm. "Because every action from this moment forward will be documented, witnessed, and if necessary, addressed in a court of law." Her ID remained open in her hand, a small but undeniable shield. Camille had no need to wield it like a weapon. The truth was enough. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was clear to everyone in that cabin that the game had changed. She watched as the flight attendants exchanged panicked glances, their carefully constructed story unraveling at the seams. And in that quiet, Camille sat as she had before, calm, composed, and completely in control. The silence following Camille's revelation hung heavy in the cabin. The Supreme Court ID sat open in her hand, its emblem a stark reminder of authority and accountability. Rachel, Bryce, and Connor stood frozen, their rehearsed composure unraveling at the seams. Eyes turned toward them, not just from Camille, but from the other first-class passengers, whose curiosity had sharpened into scrutiny. Camille didn't rush to fill the silence. She allowed it to stretch, drawing out their discomfort. "I'd like to understand," she began, her voice smooth and measured, "why I was the only passenger subjected to a random ID check, why I was skipped for meal service and offered a battered snack box while others received full meals, why I overheard phrases like, 'these people,' and suggestions that I might not belong here." Her words landed with precision, each one a stone dropped into the still waters of their fabricated narrative. Rachel's cheeks flushed a deeper red, and Bryce's expression shifted from confidence to a thin veneer of control. Connor, who had managed to keep his distance, seemed to shrink, his posture curling inward as if he could disappear into the galley. "Ma'am," Rachel stuttered, "we were just following protocol. There was a miscommunication." "A miscommunication?" Camille repeated. "I find that hard to believe. It seems the only communication that was crystal clear was the unspoken message that I didn't belong. You were quite comfortable suggesting I be moved from my seat, implying I was a threat, and even discussing involving the air marshal, all while offering first-class amenities to everyone else without hesitation." Bryce tried to regain control, stepping forward with his hands raised. "We meant no offense. We were just ensuring the safety of our passengers." Camille didn't flinch. "Safety? The only disruption here has been caused by your actions, not mine. I've been nothing but cooperative. I've remained seated, quiet, and documented every interaction. The only reason this situation escalated is because of your repeated provocations." Her voice was calm, each statement precise, yet there was an undercurrent of strength that left no room for misinterpretation. The passengers around them, who had initially seemed wary of getting involved, began to shift. A woman across the aisle subtly nodded, and a man further down, Thomas, the travel journalist, held his phone openly, recording every word. Rachel opened her mouth, a weak protest forming, but the weight of the truth bore down on her. She looked to Bryce, whose silence condemned them both. Even Connor, who had hovered at the edge of the conflict, had nothing left to say. Their authority, once wielded carelessly, had crumbled under the sharp edge of Camille's resolve. Camille leaned back, her ID still visible, a quiet reminder of her credentials. If there was truly a safety concern, it's clear where the problem lies. And if this matter is not addressed properly, I will ensure that the appropriate channels are notified, not just within your company, but legally as well. The flight attendants exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. Camille had not only called out their behavior, but also exposed the hypocrisy at its core. The power had shifted, and now, standing in the exposed light of truth, they had nowhere left to hide. A soft but clear voice broke through the charged silence. "I believe Miss Harper is correct." All heads turned toward the older gentleman in seat 2A. He had been a quiet presence throughout the flight, his focus seemingly absorbed in a leather-bound book. Now, he set the book down carefully on his tray table and removed his reading glasses, his expression calm yet commanding. "My name is Harold Bennett," he announced, his tone measured. "Retired federal judge. I've been listening to this exchange, and I must say, I find the conduct of the flight crew concerning." The shift in the cabin was palpable. Where Camille's Supreme Court ID had introduced authority, Judge Bennett's declaration brought an air of finality. His words landed with the weight of decades of legal expertise, each syllable a testament to his credibility. The flight attendants, who had struggled to maintain their composure, visibly faltered. Rachel's hands tightened around the service cart, her knuckles blanching. Bryce's expression flattened, and Connor's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through his carefully maintained mask. "I too observed the discrepancies in service," Judge Bennett continued. "I noticed when Miss Harper was bypassed for drink service, and when the quality of her meal did not match the standards offered to others. Most troubling, however, were the discussions I overheard near the galley, the ones suggesting she be removed or falsely labeled as disruptive." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Judge Bennett held up a hand. His gesture was neither sharp nor aggressive, but it was firm. "Before you speak, I advise you to consider the implications of your words. It's one thing to mishandle service. It's quite another to fabricate a narrative to justify discriminatory behavior." Camille remained still, her expression carefully composed, but beneath her calm exterior, a quiet validation blossomed. She had known her truth, had documented it, but now her account had a powerful corroborator. This wasn't just a passenger complaint. It was a statement of fact from someone whose word held significant weight. Judge Bennett turned his attention to the surrounding passengers, his voice gentle but clear. "If anyone else observed these events, I urge you to speak up. Prejudice thrives in silence, and I believe Ms. Harper deserves our support." The ripple effect was immediate. Evelyn, the corporate lawyer, spoke up first. "I've been taking notes as well. I can confirm everything Ms. Harper and Judge Bennett have said." She held up her phone, the screen filled with bullet-pointed notes. Thomas Bell, the travel journalist, didn't hesitate. "I've been recording since the first interaction. Everything's documented." His phone remained steady, its camera capturing the crew's increasingly distressed expressions. The cabin felt like a courtroom, the witnesses aligned, the evidence mounting. The flight attendants, who had once wielded their authority with casual disregard, now stood on trial. Their previous confidence had dissolved, replaced by the dawning realization that this situation had grown far beyond their control. Camille's voice, when she spoke again, was gentle but unwavering. Camille's voice, when she spoke again, was clear the truth lies and allowed the proper channels to handle this situation once we land. She didn't need to say more. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly, and the story that had begun with whispers and sidelong glances now stood in the full light of accountability. As the plane touched down at San Francisco International Airport, a collective exhale rippled through the first-class cabin. The thud of the wheels meeting the runway was more than a signal of arrival. It was a promise of resolution. Camille remained seated, her expression composed but her senses alert. She knew the most critical part of this ordeal was yet to come. The seatbelt sign switched off, and passengers began to rise, gathering their belongings. Camille noticed how the flight attendants moved differently now. Gone was the brisk confidence, replaced by hesitant steps and lowered gazes. Rachel, Bryce, and Connor huddled near the galley, their conversation muted, but their expressions marked by visible distress. A voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that all passengers should remain seated for a moment. Moments later, a well-dressed man boarded the plane, his navy blazer bearing the Horizon Air logo. His stride was professional and his demeanor exuded both authority and calm. His name tag identified him as Mark Hollis, Senior Customer Service Manager. "Ms. Harper?" he asked, his tone respectful. Camille nodded, and he offered a small, genuine smile. "I'd like to speak with you and any other passengers who witnessed the situation. We're here to ensure this matter is handled properly." Behind him, a pair of uniformed security personnel approached the flight attendants. The shift in power was complete. The crew, who had once wielded control, were now the ones being guided off the plane, their faces pale and their voices barely above whispers. Connor hesitated, his eyes darting back to Camille as if he still couldn't quite believe how thoroughly the narrative had changed. Camille stood, her Supreme Court ID tucked securely back into her purse. She gathered her notebook, slipping Evelyn's business card between the pages. Evelyn and Thomas stepped forward, joining Camille and Mark at the front of the cabin. Judge Bennett remained seated, but raised his hand slightly, a silent indication that he too was available to provide a statement. The remaining passengers watched with a mix of curiosity and support. A few murmured quiet encouragements as Camille walked past them, and the woman from 2C offered a small nod of solidarity. The truth had not only been seen, but acknowledged. A powerful antidote to the quiet poison of bias. Mark led them into a private area of the terminal, where he offered water and a comfortable place to sit. He took detailed statements, his pen moving steadily over a notepad as he documented each account. Camille spoke calmly, presenting her notes and clarifying the timeline of events. Evelyn and Thomas corroborated her story, adding their observations with professional clarity. When it was Judge Bennett's turn, his words carried the weight of experience and authority. "I would advise a thorough review of the crew's conduct," he concluded. "Discrimination, intentional or not, has no place in any setting, least of all where safety and service are paramount." Mark's expression never wavered from professionalism, but there was a genuine empathy in his eyes. "Thank you all for your statements. I assure you this will be escalated appropriately. Ms. Harper, I'll personally ensure you receive a follow-up from our corporate office within 48 hours. Camille nodded, her gratitude tempered by a firm resolve. "I appreciate that. I'm not looking for special treatment, just accountability." Mark extended his hand, and Camille accepted it. His handshake was steady, his promise implied not only by words but by action. As the meeting concluded, Camille felt the weight of the situation begin to lift. She had spoken up, and others had stood with her. The truth had found its voice, and those who had tried to silence it were now the ones facing judgment. 2 days after the flight, Camille sat at her desk in Washington, D.C., the skyline visible through her office window. Her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated briefly before answering, a practiced calm in her voice. Ms. Harper, this is Jonathan Lewis, corporate liaison for Horizon Air. I hope this is a good time to speak. His tone was polite, but beneath the professionalism, Camille sensed the weight of the situation. She closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. Of course. What can I do for you, Mr. Lewis? First, I want to personally apologize for the treatment you received on Flight 247. Our company prides itself on providing an inclusive and respectful environment, and it's clear that we fell short of that promise. We've completed our preliminary investigation, and I wanted you to be the first to know that the flight crew involved has been placed on immediate suspension pending a full review. Camille absorbed the information, her expression remaining steady. I appreciate the swift action. My goal has never been punitive, but rather to ensure that this kind of situation doesn't happen to anyone else. We understand, and that's precisely why I'm reaching out, Jonathan continued. We'd like to invite you to collaborate with us on revising our diversity and inclusion training programs. We believe your insights, particularly as a senior legal advisor at the Supreme Court, would be invaluable in shaping a more equitable approach to our customer service policies. The offer was unexpected. Camille had anticipated an apology, perhaps a promise of internal discipline, but not an invitation to contribute to lasting change. I'm open to discussing that further, she replied. It's important to me that this isn't just about optics, but about real structural improvements. Absolutely, Jonathan agreed. We're committed to more than just checking a box. Our CEO, Ana Morales, would also like to meet with you personally if you're open to it. She's eager to discuss how we can learn from this and prevent future incidents. Camille allowed herself a small, genuine smile. It wasn't often that corporations moved beyond damage control and into meaningful dialogue. I'd be happy to meet with Morales. My schedule is flexible next week. I'll coordinate with your office, Jonathan said, a note of relief in his voice. Thank you for your willingness to work with us. I assure you, your voice will play a critical role in this process. When the call ended, Camille sat in silence for a moment, processing the turn of events. What had started as a deeply uncomfortable experience on a plane was evolving into an opportunity to influence change on a broader scale. It wasn't just about vindication. It was about using her voice to open doors for others, to ensure that the next person who boarded a plane, no matter who they were, would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. She picked up her pen and began drafting a list of ideas. She thought of Evelyn, Thomas, and Judge Bennett, the allies who had stood with her. She thought of the quiet passengers who had watched but not spoken, and how new training might give them the confidence to step forward next time. Camille had turned a moment of prejudice into a movement toward progress, and that, she knew, was the best kind of justice. A week after her conversation with Jonathan Lewis, Camille sat in a sunlit conference room at Horizon Air's corporate headquarters. The room was sleek and modern, all glass walls and polished wood, but beneath the professional sheen, there was a palpable tension. Across the table sat Ana Morales, the CEO, flanked by Jonathan and a small team of executives. Their expressions were serious, their notebooks open and pens poised. Thank you for meeting with us, Ms. Harper, Ana began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of what was to come. I want you to know that your experience on Flight 247 has prompted us to take a deep, uncomfortable look at our internal culture and practices. Camille nodded, maintaining her composed demeanor. I appreciate that. I'm here because I believe in turning difficult situations into opportunities for real change. Ana exchanged a glance with Jonathan before continuing. During our investigation, we discovered that your experience was not an isolated incident. We reviewed our records and found a troubling pattern. Numerous complaints of biased treatment toward minority passengers, many of which were either dismissed or inadequately addressed. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and damning. Camille had suspected that this wasn't the first time prejudice had taken a seat in the first-class cabin, but hearing it confirmed felt both validating and sobering. The airline's leadership had not only acknowledged her complaint, but had also peeled back the layers to reveal a deeper issue, one that couldn't be resolved by simply disciplining a few employees. We've launched a full-scale review of our customer service practices and are consulting with external auditors to ensure transparency, Jonathan added. Our aim is to identify systemic problems and create safeguards against future discrimination. Your case has been a catalyst for this process. Camille's expression remained thoughtful. What changes are you considering implementing? Anna leaned forward, her hands clasped. We're starting with enhanced diversity and inclusion training for all staff, from executives to frontline employees. We're also developing a new reporting system to ensure that every complaint is logged, reviewed, and addressed by an independent team. And, with your permission, we'd like to integrate your insights directly into our training materials. Camille considered the offer, recognizing the potential impact. I'd be open to that. But I'd also recommend setting up a passenger advisory board. People from diverse backgrounds who can provide ongoing feedback on their travel experiences. It's important to keep a real-world perspective in these initiatives. Anna nodded, taking notes. That's an excellent idea. We want this to be more than just a response to bad press. It needs to be a sustained effort. Jonathan spoke up, his tone sincere. We're also reaching out to the passengers from Flight 247 who supported you. Their statements were crucial in verifying your experience, and we want to recognize their courage. If they're interested, we'd like them to participate in this process as well. Camille felt a sense of momentum. What had begun as a personal struggle for respect had evolved into a broader movement for change. Her experience was no longer just her story, it was a stepping stone toward greater accountability and fairness. As the meeting wrapped up, Anna stood, extending her hand. Miss Harper, we can't undo what happened, but with your help, we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone. Camille accepted the handshake, her grip firm. She had always believed that justice was not just about punishment, but about progress. And today, in the bright conference room of an airline headquarters, progress felt not just possible, but tangible. The grand ballroom of the San Francisco Legal Summit buzzed with anticipation as Camille Harper took the stage. The audience of legal professionals, corporate leaders, and social justice advocates filled the room, their eyes fixed on her. She stood at the podium, the soft glow of the stage lights illuminating her face. The calm confidence she projected was as much a part of her as the tailored suit she wore, a blend of strength and grace that commanded attention. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her voice carrying through the room. I had originally planned to discuss constitutional law and corporate accountability, but recent events have given me a new story to share, one that speaks directly to the intersection of law, power, and justice. She recounted her experience on Flight 247 with clarity and precision, balancing the personal with the professional. She described the microaggressions, the subtle and overt biases, and how quickly discomfort turned into a direct threat to her dignity and safety. But more importantly, she detailed how documentation, witness support, and standing firm in her truth transformed the situation from an act of prejudice into a catalyst for change. What happened to me on that flight is not unique, she said, her tone both empathetic and resolute. Many face similar treatment without the means or the voice to push back. I was fortunate. I had allies. I had the privilege of a title that forced acknowledgement. But respect should not be a privilege. It should be a right. She shifted seamlessly into broader themes, tying her experience to systemic issues. As legal professionals, as leaders, it is our duty to create systems where fairness isn't just an ideal, but a practice, where accountability isn't an afterthought, but a foundational value, and where every person, regardless of their appearance, is treated with the dignity they deserve. Camille's words resonated deeply. She provided actionable insights, suggesting policies like third-party complaint reviews, mandatory diversity training, and creating advisory boards that included not only corporate voices, but also those of everyday people. Her story wasn't just a recounting of injustice, it was a blueprint for how to address and dismantle it. When she finished, a brief, powerful silence hung in the room. Then, as if a signal had been given, the audience rose to their feet. Applause filled the space, swelling with more than just approval. It was a sound of solidarity, of understanding, and of commitment. Camille stood for a moment, taking in the sea of faces, many still clapping, some wiping away tears, others nodding with a shared sense of purpose. Afterward, attendees approached her, not just with praise but with ideas and collaborations. Lawyers from major firms, policymakers, and corporate executives all wanted to be part of the change she had inspired. Camille left the stage, knowing that her story had moved beyond the confines of that airplane. It had become a movement. She had transformed adversity into advocacy, proving that one voice, when backed by truth and resilience, could indeed make a difference. And as she looked into the faces of those around her, she saw not just supporters, but partners in the fight for a more just and equitable world. In the weeks following the conference, Camille's phone and inbox overflowed with messages. Some came from familiar names, Evelyn Green, the corporate lawyer, and Thomas Bell, the travel journalist, while others were from complete strangers. Each message shared a common thread: gratitude, inspiration, and a promise to stand up against injustice. Evelyn's email was brief but powerful. "Thank you for giving my daughter a story of courage to look up to. If you ever need legal support, consider me on your team." Thomas sent a link to his latest article, an incisive piece about bias in customer service, using Camille's experience as a springboard for a broader discussion. His article had gone viral, sparking conversations not only about airline policies, but also about everyday discrimination in public spaces. Judge Bennett reached out as well, his message filled with the wisdom of his years on the bench. "Your calm and poised response turned a moment of prejudice into a platform for progress. I've seen many fight battles, but few with such grace." Camille had never expected a retired federal judge to become an ally, but their connection grew into a friendship grounded in shared values and a commitment to justice. Even Horizon Air followed through on its promises. Camille was invited to collaborate on their new diversity training program. She provided insights, shared her story in company webinars, and helped shape policies designed to ensure that all passengers, regardless of background, would receive fair treatment. Her suggestions led to the creation of a passenger advocacy panel, a diverse group of voices that would regularly review customer experiences and influence policy changes. But the messages that touched her most came from ordinary people. A young woman wrote, "I always thought I had to stay quiet when things felt wrong. Now, I know I have a voice." A father shared that he had used Camille's story to teach his children about standing up for what is right, even when it's uncomfortable. The passengers from Flight 247 stayed in touch, too. They formed a small but powerful network, meeting occasionally over coffee or on video calls to discuss ways they could continue advocating for equality. They called themselves the Witnesses, a nod to the pivotal role they had played in documenting and supporting Camille's truth. They began attending city council meetings, joining diversity initiatives, and supporting organizations that promoted justice and inclusion. Camille felt a profound sense of closure, not because the story had ended, but because it had evolved into something bigger than herself. What had started as a personal ordeal had grown into a community of advocates, each committed to shining a light on injustice wherever it appeared. She had helped build a bridge from silence to voice, from isolation to solidarity. One evening, as she sat on her balcony overlooking the Washington skyline, Camille allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The horizon glowed with the soft hues of dusk, a reminder that each day brought the potential for change. She knew that the work of equality was never truly finished, but she also knew that every step forward mattered. Her story had become more than a moment of confrontation on a plane. It was a movement of hope, and it continued to grow, one voice at a time. Camille sat across from the news anchor, the studio lights casting a warm glow. The interview had been straightforward so far. Questions about her role at the Supreme Court, her advocacy work, and the changes implemented by Horizon Air. She had answered with poise, balancing honesty with professionalism. But as they approached the end of the segment, the anchor leaned forward, her tone shifting to something more personal. "Camille, looking back on that flight, is there anything you think could have changed the outcome?" Camille hesitated, a rare moment of vulnerability. "You know, there's one detail I haven't shared publicly yet." The room seemed to hold its breath. "I almost didn't bring my Supreme Court ID on that trip. It wasn't required for the conference, and I'd considered leaving it at home. If I had, I'm not sure how the situation would have played out." The realization hung in the air, a chilling reminder of how status and perception shape experiences. It's unsettling to think that a piece of plastic, one that signaled my professional status, was the turning point. It shouldn't take a title or an emblem of power for someone to be treated with basic respect. And that's what drives me to advocate for change, because not everyone has that card to pull out, but everyone deserves dignity. Her words reverberated through the studio, a stark reflection of the broader issue at hand. The interview concluded, but the impact of her story lingered, sparking a wave of responses from viewers across the country. As the screen faded to black, a call to action appeared. How often do we judge people by their appearance before we understand their story? Camille's experience is a powerful reminder that bias can hide in plain sight, from everyday interactions to high-stakes situations. If you witnessed this kind of injustice, what would you do? Would you speak up, document the truth, or offer quiet support? Your voice matters. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Tell us about a time when you stood up for what was right, or when someone stood up for you. Together, we can transform small moments of courage into lasting change. The video ended, but the conversation had only just begun. Comments poured in, stories of quiet bravery, of standing against prejudice, of learning to see beyond the surface. Camille's story had not only exposed a moment of discrimination, but had also ignited a movement of everyday heroes stepping forward, proving that real change often starts with a single voice, refusing to be silent. Camille's story became more than just a moment captured in the confines of an airplane cabin. It grew into a narrative of resilience and a beacon of hope for those who had felt marginalized or mistreated. Her experience showed that prejudice could surface anywhere, even at 300 feet, but also that courage and integrity could rise to meet it. The ripples of her stand against discrimination spread far beyond the flight. News outlets picked up her story, highlighting not just the injustice, but also the profound way in which she had handled it. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags promoting equality, with countless voices sharing their own stories of facing bias or witnessing unfair treatment. Camille had sparked a conversation that transcended her own experience, igniting a movement that called for accountability and change. At Horizon Air, the reforms she helped inspire were not just about damage control, but real, measurable progress. New training programs equipped employees to handle situations with empathy and awareness. A passenger advisory board was established, ensuring diverse perspectives were heard and valued. Other airlines took notice, with some reaching out to Camille to consult on their own policies. Her influence extended, helping shape the skies into a place where every passenger, regardless of appearance, was treated with dignity. But the true power of Camille's story lay in the everyday heroes it inspired. People who had once stayed silent found their voices. Bystanders who might have looked away learned to step forward. Her story became a reminder that small acts of bravery, speaking up, recording an incident, offering a supportive nod, could accumulate into a force strong enough to shift the culture. Camille remained grounded through it all. She continued her work at the Supreme Court, her legal expertise now enriched by a deeper understanding of how law intersected with lived experiences. She joined panels, gave talks, and continued to mentor young professionals, especially those from underrepresented communities. Her message was clear: your voice matters, and your story has power. The final scenes of the video featuring Camille's journey showed her standing on a stage, addressing a room full of young advocates. Her words were simple yet profound. We may not always choose the battles that come to us, but we can choose how we respond. And when we respond with truth, with courage, and with compassion, we not only defend our own dignity, we elevate it for everyone. The video faded to black, leaving viewers with a powerful, closing statement. Discrimination can appear anywhere, even at 300 feet. But so can courage, resilience, and justice. Let's challenge prejudice and ensure respect and dignity for all, no matter who they are or where they sit. A final call to action appeared on the screen, the words bold and encouraging. Like, share, and subscribe to continue championing stories of justice and equality. Your voice can make a difference. Join us in creating a world where respect is not earned but given, freely and universally. As the music swelled, the screen faded completely, leaving only a lingering sense of purpose. Camille's story had started with an uncomfortable flight, but it ended with a movement, one that promised to keep climbing, reaching new heights of fairness and understanding, as long as there were voices willing to rise with it.